Hi guys, it's great to see you. Monica, Amber, Tina, Patty, Kathy, Kelly. This is wonderful. Thank you for coming. Do me a favor. You guys know what to do. Move your mouse if you would, please. Go down to the bottom of your screen. You're going to see the green share button. Don't push that. Go to the left, see the chat box. Click on that, open it up, and do me a favor. Tell me where you're from. Mary's from Maryland. Morgan from South Carolina. This is great. You guys type it in. We'd love to know where you guys are from. We have about 200, I think it's like 193 people that are registered for this webinar. We expect about 70 to show up, and then we expect about another 60 to watch the recording. So we want to hear from you. You guys took the time to come to this webinar. Ask us questions. We're here to answer. I got great people here with me. I've got Melissa Layne. We love Melissa Layne. She's a Kinesiology Department faculty member at the University of North Georgia. Earlier, before I said it was North Carolina, I think that was wishful thinking. I thought North Carolina would be a nice place to visit. Not that we... Yeah, she's 30 years of experience in the fitness industry and has a master's degree in exercise physiology. And then we have Irene McCormick, who also has a master's in exercise physiology. She's a former senior director of fitness for Orangetheory Fitness. She's an IDEA Instructor of the Year and a twice published author with Human Kinetics. She's a keynote presenter and just an all-around wonderful person who figured out her technology in 30 minutes or less. Okay, God bless you, Irene. And then we've got the wonderful Pete McCall, who's the host of the All About Fitness podcast. It's a great podcast. He's a personal trainer, a strength coach, fitness educator. He's an author, and he has a master's in exercise science. So I'm telling you, all these people know more than all of us put together. It's just kind of scary. So we're going to talk about bigger and stronger and achieving muscular hypertrophy. Now, I was going to say, I'm going to play the stupid one here. And I'm like, no, it just comes naturally. I do not know what these people know. So it's kind of fun. All right. First question, Pete McCall. You're the only guy in the room, so I get to pick on you. What is the difference between hypertrophy and hyperplasia? And how do I recognize them? And basically, please, sir, give us some definitions first.
Hypertrophy and hyperplasia. First, I'll go with hyperplasia because hyperplasia has been seen in animal studies, but it really is not possible in humans. Hyperplasia theoretically is adding or splitting of muscle fibers. What you're doing is you're creating more fibers. The theory is you exercise and you create more fibers. So I'm going to set that aside because that has happened in a lab with animals, but it doesn't really happen in our environment in a commercial health club. It's not really what we want to pursue. But hypertrophy is increase in muscle fiber size. And you have hyper meaning growth, and I'm not exactly sure what trophy means. I'm sure Melissa can join in. But think of atrophy as getting smaller, hypertrophy is getting bigger. But with hypertrophy, what you're trying to do is you're trying to add muscle volume. And you can have two types of hypertrophy. You have sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is increasing fluid size in the cells or increasing fluid in the cells. And then you have myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is increasing density or thickness of the muscle fibers. But generally, when we think about muscles getting big or getting swole, it's primarily sarcoplasmic hypertrophy.
Very cool.
Actually, I just wanted to share something though, because it is interesting, even though there is no evidence really that there is such a thing as hyperplasia in humans, although it has been investigated a lot because, oh my gosh, any advantage, right, to increase muscle performance, size, function, ability, action, access to it. But you will hyperplase fat cells. That is why we have these massively obese individuals. That's one of the problems is their adipose tissue does become hyperplasic. So sometimes people think, how do people get to be 600 pounds? 600 pounds. That is an example of hyperplasia. So you don't see that in muscles.
And again, Irene, hyperplasia means that you're actually adding cells to the
Yeah.
body. You're adding these fat cells.
Right.
Melissa was able to give us a good explanation of why Pete's absolutely correct that it's functionally impossible for individuals to just grow muscle cells. Melissa, is that correct? And could you talk about cats?
It's hyperplasia is a theory that it happens in animals, and we know it happens in animals because there were some studies done, I want to say in the early 2000s, where exercise physiologists put a cat in a cage and taught the cat to pull a lever and the food would come out. And when they first did it with the cat, the resistance for the lever was not high. And when they finished the experiment and they counted the fibers in the cat, there were the same number of fibers. They did the research again. They increased the resistance on the lever. When the research was over and they counted the fibers, he had hyperplasia, the number of fibers. But they repeated the studies in chickens, mice, and rats, and they could not get a replicated study of such a thing as hyperplasia in those animals. And I seriously doubt that any IRB board is going to approve a study where you have to cut a person open and count their fibers when the research is over. And so we're experimenting now with having people ingest nitric oxide and not nitric oxide, nitric acid, and seeing if they can count fibers while still keeping the person intact. But as of right now, just like Pete said, it's a theory in people.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Chickens and rats, no hyperplasia there. And no one's going to volunteer their body to be cut open. I think before the camera came on, I was involved in an ACSM study. I was pregnant. Well, I have 4 kids, so I feel like I've been pregnant for a decade and a half. But and I wanted to get involved in the study, and they were looking at core body temperature. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I want to get involved. And to get the core body temperature, they literally had thermometers up people's rears. I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. And, and they were attached to a unit. And so that's how they were measuring core body temperature. I thought, no, I don't think I'm going to do that study. But so it's very interesting. So a hypertrophy. So I think the obvious next question, Pete, is what is the best method to hypertrophy the musculature that we have?
Well, according to the evidence, and I'll say that, is exercise to fatigue. When you look at exercise to fatigue, that means not being able to do another repetition. A couple things are happening, and Melissa, I'd love for you to go into detail on this because you have a lot more knowledge about the nutrition side of it. But one of the things that's happening, if you exercise to fatigue and you get that burning sensation in the muscles, you're depleting all the available carbohydrate in the muscle. That's one of the reasons why you sweat. Carbohydrate holds on, in the muscle cell, carbohydrate holds on to water. As your muscles use carbohydrate for energy, for ATP, they release the water for thermoregulation. Well, the byproduct of that is, okay, well, now the muscle cells need to restore carbohydrate. And I think, and Melissa can correct me, I think it's a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 molecules or grams of water per gram of carbohydrate. So your 1 gram of carbohydrate will hold on to 4 grams of water in the muscle cell. So that way, in the 24 to 48 hours after you exercise, one of the reasons why you'll see bodybuilders eating big things of brown rice and carrying gallons of water is they're literally pumping water back into their muscles by storing more glycogen. So in the short term, yeah, you work to exhaustion, you deplete glycogen, carbohydrate levels, then you can increase muscle size relatively without too much. I mean, you have to work to fatigue, but it can happen over a period of weeks. So that'd be the short way to get it.
Cool. Irene, I see you nodding.
Oh, I was just, listening to how Pete was sharing stuff. It's so interesting because these questions are so fabulous, but it hasn't changed in so long. This is just how you do it. And that's what's cool, I think, about the science of this these topics is because it's out there for anyone to just go and explore it and just learn about it. So it's really cool that we can kind of take the questions that people have and really point them towards a scientific rationale. So that is definitely something as a fitness pro I would walk away with.
And Melissa, so let's go back again. So how do we hypertrophy the muscles? Because Pete, love it. I understood you. Thank you.
Mhm.
So Pete hit the nail on the head. We have to work to the point of fatigue, and fatigue is reversible by rest. So not to the point of overtraining, that's not reversible by rest, but to fatigue. When you work to fatigue, you're going to deplete your glycogen stores, because you always start an exercise with a slow twitch fiber. So your fibers lay like this. If my watch is my slow twitch fibers, they intertwine with my fast twitch. When I start bench pressing, I always start with slow twitch. When slow twitch can't handle it anymore, fast twitch goes, "Ooh, I gotcha, I can help." As they help, they use a greater amount of glycogen. Your glycogen is your stored glucose. So that loss of glycogen also means a loss of water. Like Pete says, for every gram of glycogen you store 3 to 4 ounces of water. So as you sweat, you are decreasing the ability of a muscle to contract, because water has to be present to make your ATP create a cross bridge between actin and myosin. So work to fatigue. Keep your volume high, and volume means time under tension. So it doesn't matter how many reps versus sets. Mix those up all you want, but time under tension is volume. And the greater your volume, the greater you're going to see changes in your muscle hypertrophy. Sleep and eat correctly.
Okay. All right. I love that. Sleep and eat correctly. And I think it's really interesting. You talk about time under pressure. A lot of times I think about, if I want to hypertrophy my muscles, heavy. I got to work heavy. I got to work heavy. But you're giving me, I like to do sometimes lower weight, higher rep. What are your thoughts on that, guys?
That's still time under tension.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, the research is found, and I actually interviewed Brad Schoenfeld on my podcast back in January, and it's the All About Fitness podcast. But Brad and I were talking about it because Brad used to believe that light weights for high reps was relatively, we can call it garbage. But his study, he studied that, and he found that indeed that if you do light weights for high reps to fatigue, that's the key, that's the kicker right there, is you have to reach fatigue. If you do lightweight for 30 repetitions to fatigue, you can induce hypertrophy. But the key thing is getting to fatigue. So either use a lightweight and go for 30 or 35 reps, or use a heavier weight and go for 6 or 8 reps. The outcome will be the same. Getting to fatigue has been what they've seen stimulates the muscle growth.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, Diana asked a great question. When you are working to the point of fatigue, is it beneficial to take whey protein or vegan protein? Are these protein shakes? Are these supplements? And she's just throwing this out to any one of you guys. Any thoughts on that? I know we have different opinion on that. I like it.
Well, let's cover what whey and casein are. Whey is a fast digesting byproduct of dairy, and it will get into your muscle system fast. If you're taking it from a canister, you're taking an isolate, which means it's been broken down to its purest form as possible. However, as long as you're eating your amino acids, it doesn't matter whether they're coming from an isolate form or a food form. Anything that is a liquid will get into your system faster than a solid will. So that's why people like the whey isolate, is because it will get into your bloodstream and therefore into your muscles faster. Okay. So it's beneficial, but then again, you could drink a glass of milk, which is a complete protein too. So I am not a big fan of supplements. I believe if you eat a quality diet and you get your sleep and you lift heavy, you don't need to spend the extra money. A lot of people disagree, but again, nobody's body is the same. So everybody's going to have a different response to anything they put in their body.
Now, Irene, I know you have a difference of opinion on this. So tell us what your thoughts are on the supplements.
Well, I do agree with Melissa 100% on if we could eat from the diet groups that we need, that would be the best case scenario. But unfortunately, so many people, I know they do because I do it, they have to use protein powders because they travel or they need food and it's inconvenient to eat because they didn't plan ahead, whatever the reasons are. But it is confusing because there's a variety of different types of proteins out there. And the one thing I know about whey, and Melissa, hopefully you can help me understand if this is correct or not, even though it does get into the bloodstream and can, infiltrate the way we want it to quickly, man, you don't use a lot of it because it's not super bioavailable, just depending on maybe the quality. This is where quality in these products come in. But that's a question I have for Melissa. But just on the flip side, I use protein and supplements like this, whether it's soy or whey, whatever people like, post-workout. Absolutely. It's a huge part of my recovery program. I've got like a 30-minute window where my insulin, my receptors on my muscle cells are specifically and particularly more sensitive to glucose and other factors. And I like protein drinks because even though I get that big glucose burst that I'm looking for, that protein kind of dulls that response. So if you looked at these things on like a glycemic index, it wouldn't go whoosh, and I wouldn't be like, ugh, So, but that's just one way to use it. It doesn't mean that it has to be done. You can do chocolate milk and get a very similar benefit.
That's interesting. We have another question from Callie. What about collagen protein versus whey protein? Pete, any thoughts?
I add a little bit of collagen protein to my coffee in the morning, but other than that, I don't really. I defer to Melissa on that. Melissa, it would be more of the nutrition thing. But when I look at this, when I look at supplements, when I look at all this stuff, if you have a really, really specific goal, i.e., you are entering a contest, you're going to be walking on stage, you're going to be judged for your physique, you're wearing a bikini. Whether that's male or female, you're both going to be wearing that if you enter an aesthetic competition. Then this stuff may make a difference. But for those of us that are working, living, going day to day, honestly, I look at supplements as being not, maybe have a protein if you need a protein shake or make a smoothie. That's a great option if you don't have time to make a full meal. But I'm just not a huge fan. I don't think supplements are really all they're cracked up to be. Maybe a smoothie or something for a snack or something in the middle of the day, but I'm not really a huge fan of putting resources down that in that expense category. I'm sure other people disagree with that, but that just is my approach.
Then Luann asked, "Can you talk more about diet when you're lifting?" She's seen a lot of discussion about not eating enough, and I realize protein is the key, but can you explain more now? Melissa, you started to talk a little bit about protein shakes, and I asked you, I was like, okay, if you eat right, you were talking about, having a well-rounded diet, but also making sure you had enough protein. And I always have this huge guilt over red meat because I do eat red meat, and we eat organic red meat, but we eat red meat, we eat all sorts of proteins, fish and etc. And I know that there's a lot of vegetarian and vegans out there. So tell us, Melissa, what your thoughts are getting enough protein.
Protein comes in two forms, complete and incomplete. And complete means it contains all your essential amino acids, things you have to eat that you can't make. There are 20 amino acids in the body. About 10 of them are essential and about 10 of them are non-essential. One you can make if you're an adult, but a child can't make. So numbers vary. There is a big controversy as to whether plant protein is more bioavailable than animal protein. There's something called the biological value or the protein digestibility scale. and it ranks protein on how bioavailable it is to your body. 100 is a perfect score. Eggs score a 100 because what do you get from an egg? A whole chicken. So they're more bioavailable. You're always going to use a teeny tiny little bit of protein as an energy source when you work out, if you're well fed. If you're not well fed, if you're leaving carbs out of your diet, and Pete already explained the importance of those, you're going to use more protein because you can actually turn an amino acid called alanine into glucose. So people who aren't eating carbs are going to need more protein because they're turning some amino acids into glucose. So you need a little bit of protein before your workout, and then you need more after your workout, because your workout should be catabolic. It should break things down. Your workout finishes and you should go into an anabolic rebuilding state. So that's when you take your branched chain amino acids, especially leucine. Leucine is thought to start the satellite cell theory, which is how your muscle grows. If you have leucine, it is actually a high glycemic amino acid. It's going to make that insulin come out, like Irene said. So you don't take it before your workout, even though the carton says to, and the carton says to because the faster you go through it, the more money they make. You take your leucine after your workout because it starts the satellite cell theory, and you now go into process of growth. So as you know, Sara, I can talk about diet and lifting for an entire day, and I do it at every main.
But now we do have to talk about programming, because we need to talk about, what about HIIT programming? What about a straight weightlifting program? Do we do this 3 times a week, every other day? We're going to talk about concentric and eccentric in a second. But what type of training do you guys recommend if I want to? Let's say, my clients, not all of us on this call, we're weird. We like to work out. That's a problem. Normal people do not like to sweat. They don't like to wake up in the morning and go, oh, wow, I really worked out hard yesterday. They hate that stuff. So they want something short, sweet, and that's going to work. And if we give them results, they come back to us. So I know, Irene, you worked with Orangetheory. What are your thoughts on HIIT training?
Well, I'm really intrigued with some of the concomitant training research. So I try to be, especially as I'm getting older, I'm super excited because I'm doing a session on this at the Active Aging Summit that's coming up this weekend. It's training the over 40 client. They need more time under tension. They need workouts that are shorter, but with more volume. So not necessarily a bunch of crappy moves, for a couple hours a day, shorter workouts, but more frequently. And that is where I think HIIT workouts can really hit the mark. Didn't mean to say it like that, but I guess it worked out in the muscle endurance, strength, ideally hypertrophy, because people are looking for that lean look. Please, not the word tone. Oh, it's not really a word. It's just something we say. But muscles, really, this is important, especially for women who are in their 40s and older, because a lot of these women have been growing up with exercise and aerobics, but some of the women I work with in their 50s, 60s, 70s, all they know is of like Jane Fonda. So like lifting to them, they're still afraid of the hormones, which science has demonstrated many times is not going to be a problem. But in order for them to maintain mass,
a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you losing me? Okay, good. So more volume.
Okay, Irene, we're going to stop for just a second. Yeah, we're losing you. Your Wi-Fi, I think, is going, unfortunately. Pete, talking about the HIIT training and an effective, efficient way to train our clients. I always think of there's a Hunter study that looks at working out the strength training, and this is with older adults in their 60s. But what are your thoughts for, is there different HIIT programming you would recommend for a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old?
Short answer, no, not really. Long answer would be that depends on what their condition is and what any injuries are. That kind of goes without saying with any answer in exercise science, is the first two words should always be that depends, because you always have to look at it case by case. But in all honesty, and this is the big issue, right? This is the missing gap, and I think somebody has a book. Oh yeah, I have a book coming out in August called Ageless Intensity: How to Use High Intensity Exercise to Slow the Aging Process. That's kind of what I was doing last year. So while we were all at home, it kind of helped me. It forced me to write a book, another book. So Ageless Intensity is coming out in August. And what I go through is I go through the science of A, how high intensity exercise slows down aging, but B, how to put it into practical solutions. Because you have to look at it, Sarah. The primary audience that a lot of us work with are people who have been exercising for most of their adulthood. And right now there's a scarcity of research on people in their 60s who are already fit. That research doesn't really exist. And one of my next podcasts is with a guy named Norman Lazarus, who's done a lot of this research, and he's done it more on masters athletes. And he's looked at masters athletes in their 60s and 70s. If you are fit in your 60s, if you're fit in your 70s, you can train at a high intensity. But if somebody's 70 years old and relatively sedentary, that's not a place to start. But the evidence shows, when time and time again, Martin Gabala's lab up in Canada, when they look at this stuff and they look at an older population, HIIT is perfectly safe, but you have to start. You don't start with a 20-minute HIIT workout, not by any means. You start small and progress out from there. So it just depends on what people are doing. The one thing I'll say, with my recommendation would be, if we're looking at this demographic of 40 and up, my recommendation would be more like the HIIT bikes and the HIIT rowers like Stairmaster, because you're getting all the muscles in your body without pounding on the ground like you are running on a treadmill or doing stuff that's gravity loaded. So stuff like rowers and bikes are a great option. Or if somebody just wrote the pool is always a great option as well.
Very cool. And Melissa, what are your thoughts on training?
I totally agree with Pete. It all depends on where they are. You have to meet them where they are. You can't just throw everybody into HIIT. The thing you have to understand about hypertrophy is you can hypertrophy a muscle without testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin-like growth factor. You can, but it is a heck of a lot easier if you have testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin-like growth factor. And research shows that when you do HIIT training and your glycogen levels drop, like Pete talked about, that's going to cause your insulin levels to drop. And when your insulin levels are low, growth hormone is high. So that growth hormone being high, when you do HIIT training and your insulin levels are low, is going to help the hypertrophy situation. And also slow twitch and fast twitch. If I never go to HIIT training, these guys do all the work. When I go to HIIT training, fast twitch goes, I gotcha, I can help. Fast twitch fibers hypertrophy easier than slow twitch fibers do. So you have to go to the intensity where your fast twitch fibers take over.
Mm-hmm. Can I hop in on that real quick for Melissa? Because one of the biggest issues too when you look at the 50 and 60 and over population, one of the biggest issues is onset diabetes, is type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
Why? Because they might be active. They might be out walking every day. They might take a gentle fitness class, a chair exercise class, and they're getting exercise, but if they're not working to fatigue, they're not activating the type 2 fibers. Working at a lower intensity, they stay aerobic with primarily the type 1 fibers, but it's the type 2 muscle fibers responsible for carbohydrate metabolism. So as we get older, therefore, it becomes imperative to maintain high intensity strength training, high intensity interval training, so we optimize. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, but that was one of the things that occurred to me in writing my book, was like, wow, okay, this can be one of the reasons why there's such an issue with type 2 diabetes in an older population, because if they're not using their carbohydrate energy pathways, their glycolytic metabolism, they're not going to be metabolizing carbohydrate efficiently, and therefore,
Right.
I mean, that makes you. Am I right or wrong? Am I right?
You're totally correct. And type 2, the number one risk factor is age, because your insulin receptors lose their sensitivity. And we know that high intensity interval training, obviously you can't do high intensity steady state, high intensity interval training increases the sensitivity of a receptor. And you also look at the fact, nobody's brought up sarcopenia yet.
I was just about to.
Sarcopenia
I'm writing
occurs,
that down. Absolutely.
sarcopenia occurs in type 2 fibers.
Mhm.
It doesn't occur in type 1 because we do gentle exercise and we go for a walk. The type 2 that will prevent sarcopenia.
Oh, we just lost Sarah. No, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened. If Mike's on, but we just dropped Sarah.
There she
But
is.
Can you guys Wi-Fi?
okay, well, we'll go with that. But somebody, one of the things. So there's a question there about Amrap for weight training, and I'm gonna define Amrap. Amrap. When I look at Amrap, Amrap can be defined one of two ways. Amrap can be as many reps as possible, which is like reps for time. Meaning we're gonna do 30-second intervals. Melissa, Irene, Sarah, I want you to do as many reps as you can. We're gonna have 15-second intervals, and we'll work around the room. That's one way to do AMRAP is reps for time, 30 whatever seconds at a time. The other way is as many rounds as possible. You're going to do 4 or 5 exercises, 10 or 12 whatever reps each, and you're trying to do as many rounds as possible in a certain amount of time. Either way, and there's a big, that depends, either way can be an effective way to get to fatigue. It just matters what the base level of fitness is, what the exercises are, and if there are any existing injuries. But AMRAP to fatigue works great. However, I'd only do that maybe no more than 3 times a week when we're looking at an over 40 population. Because when we start getting over 40, we need a lot more recovery, and we need to make sure we're fueling right, sleeping right, hydrating right in order to be able to do more than 3 high intensity workouts a week.
And, just last on with the note, for example, love the brand. I was at Orangetheory, and there's lots of really good brands. The one thing I can say about boutique programming in this vein is many of the exercises are chosen and selected with a population in mind that may not have the ability to always withstand these intensities and loads without adequate recovery. And that's really important, because we're all getting older every single day. And as we move forward, hypertrophy is important. It is something that we should be focusing on as active aging adults. Every one of us is. And learning how to do that with more time under tension, but like Pete and Melissa have both alluded to, it's going to require more recovery. So the bang, 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 hit workouts every day, an hour or more in the gym, that can no longer be the philosophy with this mentality, because the body has to have time to repair. Remember, exercise is strictly the stimulus. All the magic happens during recovery.
And what about muscle confusion? We started talking about that at the beginning of when we all logged on. And I love, Pete, what you said about Beachbody. Please share.
Sorry if you see me moving. My roommate is sleeping right next to me, and my roommate snores really loud. I adopted an English bulldog last year as my COVID. I figured since I'm not flying at all, so if you hear it, then she's snoring about literally a meter off camera right there.
Maybe that was the noise.
That was no. Oh yeah, that was the noise from earlier. She wasn't asleep earlier. She passed out a few minutes ago. But when we look at it, so muscle confusion, I love the fact that muscle confusion is out there because it's a marketing term. If you want to understand muscle confusion, you can do a Google Scholar search for nonlinear or undulating periodization. Those are the technical terms. The Soviets, and just give a nod to the Soviets were the best sports scientists going back 50 or 60 years. So starting in the 60s, the Soviets realized that training is stress on the body. We can't stress the body at a high intensity every day, but what they would do is they would stagger their training days where there might be a high intensity one day and there might be a lower intensity the next day to promote that recovery. And so that becomes what's an undulating or a nonlinear fashion. If anybody's ever done a marathon training program where you go from 10 miles to 12 miles to 14 miles, that's linear periodization. You're gradually increasing intensity over the length of a program. But nonlinear periodization just means you're doing a different intensity with every workout, doing no more, and I'm very emphatic on this, and I'd be interested in Irene and Melissa, your thoughts. I'm very emphatic on this for unless you're under the age of 30 and you have killer nutrition, and you sleep 10 hours a night, we should not be doing more than 2 or 3 high intensity workouts a week, because our body, we need to replace we need to replace carbohydrate in the muscle cells. We need to allow testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin-like growth factors to do their job, and we just need to let our nervous system recover. So one of the biggest benefits, I believe, of the last year is that we all needed forced recovery. There are so many people in the gym, in the fitness, in the commercial fitness space who are slamming their face into a wall 6-7 days a week at their gyms. And when the gym shut down, that was the best thing in the world for them, because it forced them to rest and take it easy for a little while. But that basically is, if you want to understand undulating periodization or undulating, muscle confusion, whatever you want to call it, do a little research on undulating periodization and you'll understand it.
Yeah. Melissa, what are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with Pete when you talk about muscle confusion and changing your intensities every day, because you can't lift heavy every day. But you also have to look at people who consider muscle confusion changing a workout or an activity every day. It takes a good 6, 8, 10 weeks for your neural pathways to actually adapt to lifts. The first changes that you see in strength when somebody starts a strength training program, it's not to your muscular system, it's from your neurological system. So if you don't stay with certain exercises long enough to have your neural pathways adapt, you're never going to be able to overload so that you can hypertrophy. So muscle confusion in the form of changing your intensities, like Pete said, but avoiding muscle confusion where you change your activities so often that you can't ever progressive overload. So your periodization or your variation needs to come in different formats, intensity and your activities.
And that's interesting. It's a little bit up on the chat box here. Amy was talking about there's a group of us between 50 and 70. They came up as aerobics came up in vogue. And unfortunately, because the education did not show up until we were 35 to 50, they have bad joints, bad knees, and everything. Is the problem with the HIIT workouts is that there's a ton of planks, intense jumps, hard on the joints. Is that the only type of HIIT workout that's out there? Which it's not the case, right?
It's not the case at all. And I think the thing you have to remember is, and Irene alludes to this a lot, what America is doing is not technically high intensity workouts. What America is doing is high volume workouts. And again, volume means time under tension. High intensity is something like true Tabata training. And true Tabata training is 4 minutes where you have 20 seconds at 170% of your VO2 max. That's high intensity training. And it's so intense with Tabata, which is why Dr. Tabata said, we're only going to go for 4 minutes and I'm going to use elite athletes. So what we're doing in America is more high volume training. And we have to remember that as we get older, I'm of that age group that she talked about, we have less fluid in our joints, and the fluid that we do have takes longer to get warm. But when you're doing a HIIT training, you're not increasing the length of a warm-up for an active ager. So yes, a lot of that plays into hip replacements and knee replacements and all that stuff.
Meniscus surgery, yes.
Well, and that's why I said, like, non-weight bearing, if you're using equipment, non-weight bearing equipment like rowers and bikes with the arms, the HIIT bikes are perfect. But in all honesty, I'm going to throw another plug in here. I've been collaborating with Tricia Murphy-Madden, and we've created a program called Your Body 2.0 specifically for that market. I mean, because we realize that there's a gap in the market of where people over the age of 40 still want to work hard. We still want to work at a high intensity, but people in their late 40s, early 50s, 60s don't necessarily need to be doing the same CrossFit style workouts or the same high intensity, we'll call it grit style workouts that are taught by 20 somethings. I'm sorry, you know, I don't really, I personally, and I might ruffle some feathers here, but I really don't have much patience for a 20 something year old coach leading a group of people in their 50s, because somebody at 25, 26 years old has no idea what the 50-year-old body might be feeling, no matter how fit that 50-year-old body is. There's going to be a little bit of just adjustment for the intensity.
Right. And Kathy just asked something. She said, I'm a big weight lifter and I have a hard time breaking away from traditional one body part per day workouts. She usually does 5 or 6 different exercises, but she's been reading a lot lately about having to stimulate each muscle group twice a week. What's your opinion on this? Irene?
Real quick.
Irene, what's your opinion on that?
It makes me feel like I'm thinking about concomitant training, and how there is a lot of research that will suggest that if you throw in an aerobic stimulus, say, and you have a hypertrophy goal, it will and can supersede achieving that goal, because there's some issues with the SAID principle. I'm not totally sure on all
right, first of all, what's concomitant training?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's like doing like an aerobic workout the same day that you're trying to do like a strength hardcore workout.
Fabulous.
You kind of need to start making choices.
And what is this? And what is the SAID technique, the SAID training?
Oh, specific adaptations to impose demands, which is so funny because we do it every day. We specifically train for some sort of goal, but it's really interesting how people forget about the SAID principle. Like, for example, they want to run a 5K, which this race is going to happen outside, but they're indoors practicing on a treadmill. That's an example of ignoring the SAID principle. Seems obvious, but it's not. So if people want more strength and they want to achieve more hypertrophy, for example, or muscle size, which may be different than muscle strength and may very well be different from muscle endurance. Those are all different things with different systems. There's very specific ways should be training. I don't know about twice a day and what that research is. It's not my area, but Melissa or Pete might be able to deal with the neuro component of that.
Well, real quick, just a second, because I saw that, and I look at that again. If you're training for a stage, if you have a goal to walk on a stage, that requires a very specific approach to training. But if you're just going day to day, you want to have some lean muscle. I look at movement pattern training, and I got this years ago, and it's like, I honestly, I look at doing full body workouts 2 or 3 days a week. Some weeks where I'm getting better sleep, I'll do 3 full body workouts, or have people do 3 full body workouts. Weeks where sleep might be an issue, it changes. But when we look at it, number one, we burn more calories when we use more muscle mass. So therefore, we're being more metabolically efficient. Number two, our nervous system knows motor patterns, knows movement patterns. Your muscles don't know how to isolate. The only time your muscle, and I work with Nautilus, right? So I work with Nautilus. The only time a muscle works in isolation is in a machine designed for muscle isolation. Otherwise, anytime you're moving, multiple muscles are working together to create joint motion.
There was a good question by Diana about compound moves using upper and lower body. I wish we could keep going, but unfortunately we're out of time. We're like at time. But so I want some closing remarks, if you guys would mind. I apologize for interrupting you, Pete, but I'm going to let you close first. All right. Closing remarks, achieving muscular hypertrophy, Pete?
If that's the goal, I mean, you can isolate and go to fatigue, but generally just lift heavy, lift to fatigue with every set, eat well, and get a good night's sleep. And on that note, real quick, because somebody did ask, that is, you can't really see her because she's a dark dog, but she's sleeping on the.
I do have to say this has been the most unique webinar I've led in a long time. My husband was on computers and cell phones, and I just ran out of the room and shut everything off. I'm sure he's having a heart attack. That's my closing remark. Melissa, what can you share with us, please?
Remember that recovery is just as important as how you lift. You make testosterone in REM sleep. You make growth hormone and non-REM sleep. And I just want you guys to know that I was the one accused of having the snoring dog. And it was not my dog. My dog was dead to the world.
And Irene, your closing remark.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I want to invite you, please, if you're coming to the Active Aging Summit that's this weekend, I'm doing a session on Sunday morning on strength training for women over 40. And I'm going to talk about myths and ways in which you can achieve that. It's going to be different than what you did in your 20s and 30s, guys. It is. So I'm going to teach you what it is, and it's going to have a lot to do with maintaining and increasing your strength.
And I'm going to show you a video on the Active Aging Summit. I hope my computer is going to work correctly. We're going to see how this goes. So bear with me here. Let's make this work. Here we go. So I want to thank you all for joining us today and bearing with us, snoring dogs, my husband running every Wi-Fi in the universe. So thank you guys. And Mike Lieber, as always, thank you for creating our marvelous videos and helping to run these webinars so smoothly. Thank you all. We'll see you at the Active Aging Summit, and we are going to have a panel just like this at our Personal Training Apex convention, which will be at the end of this summer. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.